You are now listening to the IELTS podcast.
Hi there, podcast listeners. Hope it's all going good. Today I've got Tish Kirkland from YesELTS.com. Great teacher, lots of experience. And today we're going to focus on how to describe a pie chart. All right. So welcome to the show, Tish. How's it going?
Thank you very much, Ben. It's great to be here.
Excellent. All right then. Tish, before we get started, could you just give us a brief overview of like your experience and how you came into teaching, if that's all right?
Sure. I've been teaching for over 10 years now. It doesn't seem like that long ago that I was a beginning teacher, but I got into it because I guess I've always loved education and I've loved teaching and I've loved traveling. And I think if you combine those things together, you generally get an English language teacher.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's similar to my own motivations. It's there's so many English teachers just traveling around. It's but because it is a good job because it's so rewarding teaching, isn't it? And
It really is. And I love interacting with the teachers and I love interacting with the students. And you get to see people and meet people from all walks of life. It's such a great profession to get into.
yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And when you said all walks of life, like at the moment I've got an engineer. Last week I had some transport agents. It's cool. It's cool. No, I love it.
Mm, mm.
All right then. So, we're going to talk about a pie chart then. So,
Mhm.
academic in the academic task. So, Tish, could you tell us how do you prepare students for academic task one?
I would generally say for the students when not so much me preparing them, but when they're preparing themselves is, of course, to do practice tests. And if you can, do practice tests and then get a teacher or somebody with good IELTS practice or even an IELTS examiner, if you can, to check it for you and to give you feedback about it. And to give them feedback, to give the students feedback in the 4 different areas that they are graded on is the best thing, I think. Now, I think when you're writing for task 1, be it a pie chart or a line graph or anything, is to certainly stick within the word limit. So looking at about 150 to 175 words.
Mm-hmm.
Do it within 20 minutes, of course, if you can, which is, of course, that's a challenge as well.
Yeah.
And to write, I would say to write 2 paragraphs. I generally direct my students to writing 2 paragraphs. If you can, split the information into 2 different topics. It might be boys' leisure activities in paragraph 1 and girls' leisure activities in paragraph 2. It might be imported goods from Europe in paragraph 1 and imported goods from Asia in paragraph 2. Could be anything like that, but generally split the information if you can into 2 paragraphs. You certainly also need to start with an introductory statement and a concluding or summarizing statement, but you do not need to go into great detail in your introduction or summary. 1 or 2 sentences is enough in the introduction and in the summary. You really need to focus on getting the appropriate data from the graph into your writing.
Right. Excellent. Wow. Okay. And you said divided into 2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
That's a question of sort of like grouping the information. Yeah. And
Definitely.
how would you handle it if there's sort of like from just having a quick look, if you can see like 3 different types of groups of information or 4 groups of information, would you still put those in 2 paragraphs?
I would, because I think if you've got a lot of information there, like maybe 3 different graphs that you're looking at, I think you can still split that into 2 groups. And generally, the tasks ask you to summarize the information, not to describe the information. So you don't need to go into great detail describing, for example, those 3 graphs that you might see if there are 3 of them. mainly because you're going to run out of time. You've got to go over your word count. In IELTS, you're not penalised for going over your word count, but if you do go over your word count significantly, you're probably also going over your time limit.
Yeah.
So it's important to try and remember that your word count and your time limit are intertwined. So I do think if you can split it into two groups, and generally I think you can. There's going to be two geographical areas or two time frames that you can do it. And when you do that, it means that you can compare and contrast within your paragraph.
All right. And you said don't go into detail in the introduction or in the summary. And so you'd recommend putting all the detail, well, not all, but most of the detail in the body of the actual paragraphs, yeah.
Absolutely. So certainly with your introductory statement, you should say what kind of graph it is and what it's describing, and are there any time frames. Just for example, this line graph shows radio and television audiences in the UK from October 1997 to December 1997. That's enough. Already in your introductory statement, for example, that one, you've got radio and television. So you might then naturally, first group paragraph topic would be about radio and second one about television.
Right then. Okay. That's good. That's good. And now, how would you recommend going about for the summary? You wouldn't rephrase the introduction. You'd just...
That's right. That's right. You wouldn't rephrase the introduction because I think one of the most important things to remember with IELTS, and what I often tell my students is that, or in fact, what I always tell my students is that you're there to show off your English. So you've got to show off your English, show the examiner how brilliant you are at using English, how flexible and varied your English is. So if you're repeating something that's in your introduction or introductory statement, in your conclusion or summarizing statement, you're not showing off your English. You really want to impress the examiner, so you want to show them how wonderful you are. Getting back to that, don't repeat what you've written in the introductory statement. But in the summarizing statement, this is where I would report any major trends. So sometimes, not always, there is a trend or something significant that has happened over the time with that, or in the data that graph is describing. So you could say something like, overall, listening to the radio was more popular in the morning, whereas watching television was more popular in the evening.
Right then. Okay.
So using that kind of summarizing statement, I think, would be a good thing to do.
And in that summarizing statement, you would just note one big change and forget about the less important ones.
That's right, I would. The less important changes are described in the body of your paragraphs.
Right then. Okay. That's excellent. That's excellent advice.
I can't say that that's for every single one, but that's generally speaking. Like, there are so many different types of tasks that you may be required to do in academic task 1, but that's certainly one way of I recommend that way.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's I think that's what we need right now. Just a general overview, because a lot of students it's quite difficult unless you get some proper advice on how to go about it. But,
definitely, and this is getting back to something I was talking to you about earlier, was with my students who live in Australia. Often they're master's level students. They can write essays of 5,000 words or 10,000 words. The English is good, but it's getting that specific IELTS format that the examiner is looking for, being able to condense that information into 150 words or 250 words for task 2. So it's a real skill to be able to do that. And even a native speaker, master's level native English speaker would probably struggle to do that certainly in an IELTS writing if they hadn't had any training.
Exactly, yeah. I've heard of Irish and British people going
Yeah.
to Australia and getting in contact with IELTS instructors just to
Yeah.
learn these
Yeah.
skills. It's a lot harder than expected. They think as they're native speakers, it's just going to be a walk in the park, but it's far
Yeah.
from it, because just
Yeah.
exactly like you said, these are specific IELTS related skills.
That's right. That's right. Another thing I would do is certainly have a look at the band descriptors that are available, the IELTS public band descriptors for writing and for speaking, so you can see what the examiner is looking at when they're looking at your writing. So you can see where you're at, and certainly if you can get, if you're lucky enough to find an IELTS examiner who can grade your writing for you and tell you where you are at each of those bands areas, then you can see what you need to work on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to mention it before when you said it, but unless you're getting that feedback, it's like I don't know, it's like swimming in the ocean with no direction. You know, you can't make progress unless you've finding out where you're going wrong, correcting it, and then moving to the next stage. It's essential. It's essential to have the examiner a tutor looking at practice papers. All right.
Definitely.
I think we went off on a tangent there, but never mind. It was good information. I was just going to ask you the next one, which was, are there any essential grammar points to consider for task 1?
I think you probably really need to make sure that you are looking at your graph to see if there's any time on it, and that you're describing the time of the graph correctly. So you're using the correct tense when you're describing the graph. So if the event happened in the past, make sure that you're using the appropriate past tense.
Yeah.
If there's no date on it, then you're probably going to be using the present tense.
Yeah.
You can use the present tense to describe what you see in front of you right now, but then as soon as you're describing the things that happened, that graph is about, then you need to make sure you're using the correct past tense. I would probably try to throw in at least one passive construction. Usually it's appropriate in task 1, and if you can use passive correctly and other grammar structures, then the examiner looks at that and goes, wow, great, this person's cool. They're using a variety of grammar structures correctly. Let's give them a good mark for grammatical range and accuracy. I would try and use the passive if you can, and make sure that your tense or tenses that you use are correct.
Excellent advice there. Yeah. Could you give us an example of a passive structure?
So I could say the number of CDs which were sold increased dramatically. So were sold to be plus past participle is an example of the passive.
Right then. Okay. The number of CDs that were sold in 2010 changed dramatically between blah blah blah, or something like that. Okay.
That's right.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah. It's so important to pay attention to those to the time frames, you know, and getting good control of that grammar as well. It's it's essential. Right. Another one. This is a bit of a devil's advocate question, but I'll ask it anyway because it's good advice. So, for task 1 on the academic paper, would you recommend writing all the specific figures?
No, I would not recommend writing all of the specific figures.
Yeah, of course.
Having said that, it depends how many there are. If you've only got 5 specific figures, then maybe yes. But if you've got 20 specific figures, then certainly no. I would look at trends. So normally what I would look at for task 1, and of course it does depend on the task, but generally speaking, I would talk about the top thing, the most CDs sold, for example, the second, and then the bottom.
Right.
So I would look, and that would be divided into, say, the top, the second top, and the bottom CD sold in 1997 in paragraph 1, and then maybe it's by country, and then the second top and the bottom number of CDs sold in 2007. Even if it's telling me a lot more than that, I would focus on trends, because it's certainly most of the time the task is to summarize, not to describe, so you don't have to go into great detail.
Exactly, yeah. It's okay to leave out information, especially if it's just going to crowd your essay. If you're just going to fill it up with irrelevant numbers, then definitely forget about it. But I like that advice of just focusing on the top two and the largest two segments, I imagine, and then the smaller ones. And if the smaller ones, which were made up of like, I don't know, about 5 or 6 0.5%, you know, those tiny ones that just get, you'd obviously group all of those together, no?
Yeah, it depends on the task again, like whether but you could say if there were 3 items that were like 0.5, then you could say for country A, country B, country C, all 0.5.
Yeah.
It is important to include the data, though, the numbers and the figures as necessary. Don't forget to include those.
Okay, all right. Okay then. And now for the next question, I want to ask you, what is the specific vocabulary that's necessary for these pie charts?
I would certainly be flexible and varied in showing off your vocabulary, but also try to be consistent as well, which I know kind of sounds like I'm not being consistent myself when I say that. But use those words like portion and sector, and also use the words like third and quarter and 3/4 and 2/3 and half and all, and know what you're talking about when you're saying 2/3 as opposed to 3/4, because you'd be surprised how many students see something at 68% and will call that 3/4, whereas I would only call that 2/3, roughly speaking.
Yeah. It just shows good control of not good control. It just shows you pick up points for the range of vocabulary used, won't you? If you can use all of that, and you can use it correctly, of course, as well.
That's right. So definitely practice and learn, if you don't know already, that a quarter is the same as 25%, and a third is 33 1/3%, and use those.
Right, yeah, that's great advice there. So the next question was, would you recommend using like a few, the majority, hardly any to describe the portions, or do you think it's not necessary?
I think you can use these words to describe the portions, particularly in your summarizing statement or statements, where you can say the majority of users preferred the Mac over the PC. So I think you can use that. They can be a bit wishy-washy, like what does constitute the majority if you've got 4 different things that you're looking at. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to use these terms appropriately. I do.
Yeah, just like use them within, not for the whole essay, just not for the summary. Yeah.
I mean, but usually you are talking about specific numbers, so you couldn't really say a few and then 25% of the users. Then it kind of sounds a bit strange. You'd say a quarter. Yeah.
And then just keep them separated then. Keep them. Yeah. All right then. Are there any common mistakes students make when describing a pie chart?
Describing a pie chart. Sometimes they forget to call it a pie chart, so I think it's a good start to first of all say the pie chart shows blah blah blah. So that's a good thing to do. Can't think of any. Let me have a little think. Common mistakes they make. I think I would say overall the common mistakes that students make are not specific to pie charts, but they are specific. They are about task one in general.
Right. Okay.
Is excluding data when it needs to be included and including too much data when it's not needed. But that's finding the balance, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. And it's one of those skills that we went back to that we spoke about at the beginning, and
That's right.
knowing what information to include is
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things, and it's where a lot of students fall down, like you said before. So, in the so you teach all this information, all similar information on your website, don't you?
I do, and I go into more detail than what I've spoken about here.
Mm-hmm.
I offer, in terms of task one, I don't have a set course that's available online yet, but I will have one soon. But I do offer an essay checking service where the students can send an essay to me, and I'll grade it. I'll give like a real band score, and also give them some tips and hints throughout, and corrections about what they could do to improve or change or adjust things as necessary.
And why would that? How would that help a student having their exam paper corrected? And I obviously know the answer. I was just sort of, I mean, what advantages would a student get from having their exam paper professionally looked at and professionally reviewed?
Well, hopefully that they can see where the areas are that they need to revise and review for themselves.
Yeah.
And it may be just collocations like listen to the radio, watch television, and so on. Not look television or listen radio. So it could be something like that. Or it could be more to do with the structure, like I was speaking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a really good idea to see where you are at, to get an idea of what your level is and how you can hopefully to improve and
I
and to
imagine.
learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, I imagine that it's also going to speed up the learning process, because now once they get the essay corrected and back in their hands, they're going to know exactly what to focus on, and they can just focus exactly on these spots that that you have pointed out, instead of going and learning about something else. Now they can just focus on these points and address that issue that just they have.
That's right. That's exactly right. And sometimes they even learn something. I had a student who, for the longest time, thought that beef in English meant ox, and she thought Australians were eating a lot of ox meat. And then I said, but beef is the meat from the cow, and she said, really? I thought it was from the ox, and it was like a revelation for her.
Yeah, I have similar things here. It's usually here in Spain, it's just a different, well, usually with pronunciation, the amount of students that have said you say answer, and it's not answer, and I'm like, no, it's answer, and I'm like, all my life since I was 10 years old, I've been saying answer, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
I
one of the
teach a
good
lot of
things.
Spanish students at the moment. It's very interesting, and I can tell that you've been living in Spain because you say perfect. It's a real Spanish thing to say, perfect.
Why? What would you say?
I'd say good.
Okay.
It's kind of an overuse of the word perfect when maybe it's not actually perfect, but it just and my Spanish students use it, and I know I do now too. I've picked it up from them.
Yeah.
Great, cool.
It's starting to happen, you know. It's happened once or twice, and you're just like, woof. But yeah, you got to keep a track on it. All right then. I was just got another question now. So, in your online course, what's the main
Mhm.
objective? What's like the final outcome that you want a student to achieve after doing the course?
I want them to get a band 8 or a band 7 or whatever band they desire. Normally it's a band 7, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I want them to pass the IELTS. I want them to get the score that they want and to get and then they can move on with their lives and do what they really need to do, which is normally to get into university or get permanent residency or something like that. So yeah, my main objective is for the students to pass IELTS, well, not pass, but to get the band score that they desire.
All right, perfect. Perfect. All right then. Okay. All right then. Well, thanks very much for agreeing to do the interview with me. It's been awesome. I really enjoyed it. It's been perfect.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been awesome. That's a really, really good New Zealand and Australian phrase. So I'm happy to hear you saying that. Awesome.
I did it for you. No.
Oh.
All right, Tish. Could you just tell us where the students can find you? Where your website is?
Okay, they can certainly find me online, and my website is www.yes-IELTS.com. But if you Google me, Tish Kirkland, I'm sure you can find me too.
All right, perfect, excellent. Thank you very much, Tish.
You are very welcome.
It's been great. Okay then, take care, yeah?
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.